in the founding, in the debates around how to establish a constitution, move from a set of colonies to a unified country, right? In the aftermath of the Revolutionary War, there's this debate, so James Madison's proposing, let's have a unitary system of government with a really powerful national government, right? Not so much power to the states. Others, especially from small states and to some extent slave states, are saying, no, we need a lot of power in the states, right? We don't want the national government coming in, banning slavery, things like that. There's this big debate going on. So what they do is this compromise. They compromise between a system that, so there's some authority for the national government, some for the state governments, and they're not meant to encroach on each other. So that's federalism there. And then going forward, so in selling federalism for the US Constitution, Madison and the Federalist Papers and a ton of other authors are writing, this is going to protect against tyranny. We don't want, different religious groups are in different states, right? They can customize policy to each other. And then Lewis Brandeis in the 1930s, fast forward, has this other new, really positive idea of laboratories of democracy, of learning from each other across state lines, right? If there's a financial crisis like the Depression that Brandeis is living through, right? If a state is successful, other states can look. Like in the 2008 financial crisis, the idea is that Minnesota is doing a good job hiring back public sector workers, restarting its economy, raising tax revenue. Maybe Wisconsin, neighboring state, is going to look over and say, let's copy those successful things Minnesota did. But what we're finding now is if that were ever true, it's definitely not true now.
Right. And I imagine on some level, the reason why we had estates to begin with was because the king didn't want a sort of a unified, maybe opposition to his, like, I guess, minimal requirements of like, we just want to extract your resources. And if we can create different sort of regions that have different sort of agendas, maybe there won't be something like some type of revolution at one point and everybody will get together. But the irony is, it feels like that creation of maintaining separate sort of fiefdoms makes it that much harder to really have democracy function on some level. And we'll get into that. But so what changed? Why was Brandeis so optimistic, and why did that change since that time? I mean, he's looking back and going like, I guess you're 60 years out or so from 500,000 people dying because of the power of the states. But like, what was going on that he thought this was going to be helpful? But then going forward, what has changed?
Yeah, so Brandeis is coming at a time when it's like, we need policy experimentation. There's depression, there's new technology coming in, there's world wars happening. We need to find new ways to experiment, to solve problems. Maybe the states can do these experiments. Then going forward, and then that actually in the mid 20th century after that, that kind of worked because the political parties, the Democratic and Republican parties, were decentralized just like US institutions, right? So US institutions, all this authority at the lower level to customize, and the parties would kind of customize. Like a Northern Republican was not like a Southern Republican. A Northern civil rights labor Democrat from Detroit is nothing like a Southern Dixiecrat segregationist Democrat, right? The party system kind of matches the institutional system. But then what we had since the 70s, and especially since the 90s and 2000s, you guys know this, the nationalization of fundraising in politics, the nationalization of media and the rise of cable news and Fox News, rise of social media and the internet, destroying revenue of local newspapers. You have the nationalization of interest groups and sort of the rise of national sort of groups like, on the right, the Koch network, on the left, a group like MoveOn.org, able to coordinate the parties. And what that does is make two national parties, but those two national parties are battling it out over this system that is super decentralized authority. And especially now on the Republican side, that's creating huge risks and also in general preventing the US from solving national problems.
Well, so it seems like it flips with that. What the balance completely flips fairly quickly with the rise of national parties and fundraising, right? Where the laboratories where the experimentation about messaging, hey, is it going to be Dr. Seuss? So now we've decided it's critical race theory. That happens on the media level and on the party apparatus level. And then the foot soldiers of the states, that's where it's implemented.
That's so well put, Emma. So I think critical race theory is a great example of how politics is so nationalized, right? This is happening in local school boards, state legislatures battling over this sort of national issue. These are not happening, backlashes to critical race theory or new sort of trans rights issues aren't happening in places experiencing like a local influx of critical race theory that we're responding to, right? They're responding to a national culture war and battling it out through these subnational institutions. And that's actually pretty dangerous. So right now, what we're seeing overwhelmingly, this is so different than, so again, racial conflict is still so central to battles over American democracy. But the difference between Jim Crow and now is that Jim Crow racial politics were so regional. Battles over desegregating public goods in the South, battles over redistribution in the South between Southern Black civil rights activists and Southern, sort of white hegemonic segregationists, right? Now what we're seeing is, no, it's like from Wisconsin to North Carolina, right? We're seeing battles over democracy for the direction of the country.
It's interesting because it does feel like, LBJ was correct, but underestimated the durability of the racial politics in this country. And when all of a sudden it was basically like, we're going to now polarize racial politics in the same way that, that increased the polarization of the party. That was not the purpose, but essentially everybody lined up based upon whether I wanted to give black people civil rights or not. And then all I can remember is, and I can't remember which author told us the stat, but it wasn't until like 2010 that, or even as late as 2008, maybe it was, 50% of non-college educated white people still believed that the Republican Party was more liberal in terms of race than the Democratic Party. And when Barack Obama got elected, that was like the final sorting out of all of those essentially Southern Democrats who realized, like, wait a second, the Democratic Party doesn't do what it did when my dad was a Democrat back in the day. They're the ones who are doing the phone slush fund or whatever it is. And so that takes us there. So
the Southern Deep South had Democratic state legislatures through the 2000s, like in Mississippi, Arkansas. Like, we don't quite remember that. They're conservative Democrats, but they were Democrats.
Right. And once that sort of like awareness became like, wait a second, this is not my dad's Democratic Party anymore. They're not Dixiecrats. They're not, fighting against, sort of like, they're not trying to disenfranchise black voters anymore. We've got to move to the Republican Party. And that's basically what happened.